The first time I realized something was wrong, it wasn't because of a shout or an argument. It was the quiet way my son avoided my eyes when I asked a simple question, the kind of question any mother asks without thinking twice. We were sitting in my living room, the same room where I had watched him take his first steps, the same couch where he used to fall asleep on my shoulder after school. I smiled and said, almost casually, "So, tell me, what date is the wedding?" I expected excitement. I expected plans, colors, relatives traveling from far away. Instead, there was a pause that felt too long. My son cleared his throat. Before he could answer, his wife, my daughter-in-law, smiled politely and said, "Oh, we got married yesterday."
Just a small thing.
Only special people were there. The words landed softly, but they hit me hard. Yesterday.
Married.
Special people. I felt my smile freeze in place as my mind tried to catch up. Yesterday meant I wasn't invited. Special people meant I didn't qualify. I laughed it off in that awkward way people do when they don't want to show they're hurt. I told myself not to overreact. Young people do things differently now, I thought. Maybe it was last minute. Maybe they planned to tell me later. Still, that night, I couldn't sleep. I replayed the conversation again and again. I wondered what I had done wrong, or if I had done anything wrong at all. I remembered how involved I had been in my son's life, how I had supported him through college, through his first job, through every difficult phase. I wasn't perfect, but I was always there. So how did I become someone who wasn't special enough to be told about my own son's wedding? Over the next few days, I tried to act normal. I sent a congratulatory message. I even bought a small gift, though I didn't know where to send it, because no one had told me where they were living now. My son replied with short messages, polite but distant. His wife didn't message me at all. I told myself again to be patient, to give them space. Newly married couples need time, I thought. I didn't want to be the interfering mother-in-law everyone complains about. A week passed. Then one afternoon, my phone rang. I saw my daughter-in-law's name on the screen and felt a strange mix of relief and anxiety. Maybe this was it, I thought. Maybe she was calling to explain, to talk, to build a bridge between us. I answered with a warm hello. Her tone was sharp, businesslike, without any greeting. "The rent is overdue," she said. "Did you transfer it?" For a moment, I thought I had misheard her. Rent? Transfer? My heart started beating faster as confusion washed over me. I asked her to repeat herself, thinking there must be some mistake. She sighed, clearly irritated. "The apartment rent. You said you would handle it. The landlord is calling." Her words were firm, as if this was an agreement we had made together. But we hadn't. No one had asked me. No one had explained anything. I felt something shift inside me, a quiet realization forming. This wasn't just about a wedding I wasn't invited to. This was about expectations placed on me without respect, without conversation. I took a deep breath before answering. I didn't want to shout. I didn't want to cry.
I wanted to understand.
"Didn't I tell you?" I said slowly, choosing each word carefully. There was a pause on the other end now. The kind of pause that comes when someone isn't sure what's coming next. My voice was calm, but my hands were shaking. In that moment, years of unspoken feelings pressed against my chest. Love for my son, disappointment, confusion, and a growing sense that something was very wrong in this new family dynamic. After I hung up, I sat alone in my kitchen, staring at the wall. I thought about how quickly roles can change. One day you're a mother whose opinion matters, whose presence is expected. The next day, you're someone kept out of important moments, but still expected to provide support when it's convenient. I wondered if my son knew about this call, if he agreed with it, or if he had simply stepped back and let his wife handle things. The silence from him felt louder than any argument could have. I started remembering small details I had ignored before. The way my daughter-in-law would change the subject when I asked about their plans. The way decisions were made without including me, yet somehow I was always expected to adjust. I asked myself if this was normal, if this was what letting go looked like, or if I was being quietly pushed aside. I didn't want to believe the worst, but my heart felt heavy with questions that had no answers. That night, I couldn't help but think about the word she used, special. Who decides who is special enough? Is it about money, control, or something deeper? I had always believed family meant showing up for each other, sharing both joy and responsibility. But now it felt like the rules had changed without anyone telling me. I was left standing outside a door that had closed quietly, without warning. As I lay awake, I realized this wasn't just my story. It was about boundaries, respect, and the unspoken expectations that can tear families apart. It was about a mother trying to understand her place in her son's new life, and a daughter-in-law who seemed to see that place very differently. And it was about a phone call that revealed more than anyone intended. Because what I hadn't said yet, what I was still holding back, was the reason I replied the way I did. The reason behind my words, "Didn't I tell you?" was something they clearly hadn't expected. And when the truth finally comes out, it will change how they see me, how they see each other, and maybe even what family really means. After that call, the house felt unusually quiet. The ticking of the clock on the wall sounded louder than it ever had, and every small noise made my thoughts jump. I kept replaying her voice in my head, not angry exactly, but entitled, as if the situation was obvious and I was the one being unreasonable. I poured myself a glass of water, but my hands were still shaking. I didn't drink it. I just stood there, leaning against the counter, trying to steady my breathing and make sense of what was happening. I thought back to the months before their marriage, trying to find the moment when things started to change. When my son first told me he was serious about her, I was happy for him. I welcomed her into my home, cooked meals she liked, asked about her family, her work, her dreams. She was polite, reserved, always respectful on the surface. But there was a distance too, something guarded in the way she spoke, as if she was always measuring her words.
I assumed she was shy.
I never imagined it could turn into this. The topic of money had come up once or twice before, but never directly. My son would say things like, "Things are a bit tight right now," or "We're figuring stuff out." As a parent, I offered help when I could. Not because I was asked, but because that's what parents do. Still, I was careful not to interfere. I never wanted them to feel controlled or dependent. Maybe that was my mistake. Maybe my silence was taken as permission. What hurt the most wasn't the rent itself. It was the assumption. The idea that decisions could be made behind my back, important life events hidden from me, but financial responsibilities still placed on my shoulders. I wondered when this arrangement had been decided. Was it discussed during that special wedding I wasn't invited to? Did they talk about me there, about what I would or wouldn't do? The thought made my chest tighten. I picked up my phone and scrolled through old messages from my son. There were fewer calls lately, fewer long conversations. Our chats had become short updates instead of real talks. I remembered how he used to call me just to ask what I was cooking or to complain about work. Now, days would pass without a word. I told myself this was normal, that marriage changes things. But deep down, I felt I was slowly being erased from his daily life. The more I thought about it, the more that unanswered question echoed in my mind. Why hide the wedding? If it was small and simple, why not tell me beforehand? Even a message would have been enough. The secrecy made everything else feel suspicious. It made the rent call feel less like a misunderstanding and more like a pattern. A pattern of control, of deciding what I should know and when. Later that evening, my son finally called. His voice sounded tired, like he'd been carrying a weight for a long time. He asked how I was, as if nothing had happened. I almost laughed at the normalcy of it. I asked him about the wedding again, gently this time, hoping he would explain. He hesitated, then said they didn't want pressure or opinions. Those words stung more than I expected. Pressure. Opinions. As if my presence automatically meant problems. I didn't mention the rent call. Not yet. I wanted to hear him talk freely, to see how much he knew. He spoke about work, about how busy things were, about how they were still settling in. When I asked where in was, he changed the subject. It was clear he was avoiding something, or someone had told him to. When we hung up, I felt more confused than before. That night, memories I had buried started to surface. Moments when my daughter-in-law would smile, but not quite meet my eyes. Times she would speak for my son before he could answer. Small things I had brushed aside because I didn't want conflict. Now those moments felt heavier, like clues I had ignored. I wondered if she saw me as a support system or as an obstacle, or maybe both. I also started questioning myself. Had I been too generous? Too available? Had I created expectations without realizing it? Parents often give without counting, without setting limits. But what happens when giving turns into being taken for granted? I didn't want to believe my own son would allow that, yet the silence between us suggested otherwise. The words I held back during that call kept circling in my mind. There was a reason I had replied the way I did. A reason rooted in a conversation from months ago, one that seemed forgotten now. At the time, it felt unimportant, almost casual. But now it felt like the key to everything. I wondered if bringing it up would open a door or slam it shut forever. As days passed, the tension didn't ease. If anything, it grew heavier. I felt like I was walking on unstable ground, one wrong step away from a confrontation that could change everything. Friends noticed I was distracted, quieter than usual. I brushed off their concerns, not ready to share a story that was still unfolding in my own head. Deep down, I knew this wasn't just about money or a missed invitation. It was about respect, about communication, and about a family quietly drifting apart while pretending everything was fine. And the longer the truth stayed unspoken, the more damage it seemed to cause. I could feel that something was coming, something that would force all of us to face what we had been avoiding. And when that moment arrived, there would be no going back. The next morning, I woke up with a heavy feeling that didn't fade with daylight. It sat in my chest as I made tea, as I watered the plants by the window, as I tried to follow my usual routine. Everything looked the same, yet nothing felt normal anymore. I kept checking my phone, half expecting another call or message, half hoping there wouldn't be one. Silence had become its own kind of pressure. I started thinking about the apartment they were living in. I remembered my son mentioning it months ago, saying they were looking at a place. At the time, I had asked simple questions, where it was, how much it cost, whether it was temporary. The answers were vague. "We'll manage," he had said. I took that as reassurance, not a warning. Now I wondered if decisions had been made long before I knew anything about them, with assumptions quietly built in. From my daughter-in-law's perspective, I tried to imagine how she saw things. Maybe she believed I had promised something. Maybe my son had spoken on my behalf without fully explaining. That thought hurt in a different way. The idea that my words or my silence might have been reshaped into expectations without my consent made me feel invisible. It also made me question how well I really knew the life my son was living now. Later that day, I received a message from a relative congratulating me on the wedding. My heart skipped. I replied politely, then asked how they knew. The answer came quickly. Photos had been shared in a family group I wasn't part of. I stared at the screen for a long time.
So, it wasn't just me.
There were others who knew, others who were considered special. That word came back again, sharper than before. It wasn't just exclusion, it was a choice. I didn't ask to see the photos. I wasn't sure I could handle them. The smiles, the celebration, the moment that should have included me but didn't. Instead, I put my phone down and tried to focus on the present. But the present felt tangled with unanswered questions. Each one seemed to pull at a thread that led to another, deeper knot. That evening, my daughter-in-law sent a short message. No greeting, no explanation. Just, "Please let us know about the rent today." I read it twice, then a third time. The urgency felt deliberate, like pressure. I could almost sense her impatience through the screen. I didn't reply right away. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I knew that whatever I said would shift the balance of everything. I thought about calling my son again, but something stopped me. Part of me wanted him to reach out first, to acknowledge what was happening instead of pretending it wasn't there. Another part of me feared what he might say if I pushed too hard. I didn't want excuses. I wanted honesty. And honesty can be frightening when you're not sure you're ready to hear it. As the hours passed, I reflected on how easily family roles can blur. When a son becomes a husband, loyalties shift, priorities change. That's natural. But where does that leave a mother who has always been there, quietly supporting from the background? I wasn't asking to be in control. I was asking to be included, to be respected enough to be told the truth. I also couldn't ignore a growing concern. This wasn't just about me. If financial pressure was already this intense, so soon after marriage, what did that say about their situation? Were they struggling more than they admitted? Or was this about testing boundaries, seeing how far they could go? The uncertainty made everything feel unstable, like walking on ground that could give way at any moment. That night, I dreamed of my son as a child, standing at the door with a backpack too big for his shoulders, turning back to wave before running off. I woke up with tears in my eyes, realizing how similar this felt. Another departure, another moment of letting go, but this time, without clarity, without closure. Just distance and confusion. By morning, I knew one thing for sure. The conversation I had been avoiding could not be delayed much longer. The unspoken truth was sitting between us, growing heavier with every hour of silence. And when it finally came out, it would force all of us to confront what we had been pretending not to see. The question wasn't whether things would change, but how, and at what cost. The pressure reached a point where even small things felt overwhelming. A missed call made my heart race. A message notification made my hands go cold. I realized how deeply this situation had settled into my daily life, quietly changing my mood, my sleep, even the way I looked at my phone. I had never imagined that my own family could make me feel this uncertain, this on edge. Another message came in late that afternoon. This time it was from my son. "Can we talk tonight?" That was all he wrote. No explanation, no emoji, no warmth. Just a sentence that felt heavy with meaning. I stared at it for a long time before replying yes. My mind immediately started filling in the gaps. Was this about the rent? About my response? About something I still didn't know? When the call finally came, his voice sounded tense, like he was choosing his words carefully. He said his wife was stressed, that things were complicated, that there had been misunderstandings. He kept using vague phrases, circling around the real issue, without naming it. I listened quietly, letting him speak, trying to hear not just his words, but what he wasn't saying. Every pause felt loaded. He mentioned money again, this time more gently. He said they were counting on me, that things would settle soon, that this was temporary. I asked him directly when this counting on me had been decided. There was silence. Long, uncomfortable silence. That silence told me more than any explanation could. It confirmed what I had begun to suspect. Decisions had been made without me, but about me. I brought up the wedding again. Not angrily, just honestly. I asked him why I wasn't told, why I had to find out after the fact. His answer was soft but defensive. He said they wanted peace, that they didn't want drama, that they thought this was the easiest way. Easiest for whom, I wondered.
Certainly not for me.
The call ended without resolution, both of us emotionally exhausted, both holding back words that were too heavy to say out loud. That night, I received another message from my daughter-in-law. This one was longer, more emotional. She wrote about pressure, about feeling unsupported, about expectations placed on her as a new wife. She said she thought I understood, that she believed we were on the same page. Reading her words, I felt a strange mix of sympathy and frustration. We were clearly reading from different versions of the same story. I started to see how this conflict had many layers. From her point of view, she may have felt overwhelmed trying to build a new life and leaning on what she thought was available support. From my son's point of view, he was likely caught in the middle, trying to keep peace while avoiding confrontation. And from my side, I felt sidelined, expected to give without being given honesty in return. No one was entirely wrong, yet no one was truly right either. Still, one detail continued to bother me more than anything else. The timing. The wedding, the move, the rent. All of it seemed rushed, almost secretive. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more going on beneath the surface. Something they weren't ready to say, or maybe something they assumed I already knew. The mystery sat between us like an unspoken truth, growing heavier with each interaction. A few days later, I learned through another relative that the apartment lease had been signed before the wedding. Long before. That meant plans had been in place, while conversations with me stayed vague and incomplete. I felt a quiet shock settle in. This wasn't last-minute stress. This was something structured, planned, and deliberately kept at a distance from me. I began to prepare myself for the conversation I knew was coming. Not just about rent, but about boundaries, respect, and honesty. I rehearsed words in my head while doing everyday things, washing dishes, folding laundry, sitting alone in the evening. I wanted to speak calmly, without accusation, but with clarity. I wanted to be heard, not just listened to. The tension reached a breaking point when my daughter-in-law called again, her voice tight with urgency. She said the landlord was threatening action, that this couldn't wait any longer. I could hear panic beneath her firmness now. For the first time, she sounded unsure, vulnerable even. I closed my eyes as she spoke, feeling the weight of the moment settle fully on my shoulders. I told her we needed to talk properly. Not in rushed messages or tense phone calls, but face to face. There was a pause, then a reluctant agreement. We set a time. When the call ended, I sat very still, aware that everything was about to change. Whatever I said next would shift the direction of our relationship forever. As the meeting approached, my thoughts returned again and again to that unfinished sentence from before. The truth behind my reply, "Didn't I tell you?" The conversation from months ago that none of them seemed to remember, or perhaps hoped I wouldn't bring up. That truth had the power to explain everything, or to tear open wounds that had barely begun to heal. The air felt heavy with anticipation. I knew the next conversation would bring everything to the surface, the hidden expectations, the quiet decisions, the hurt feelings no one had named. And as much as I feared it, I also knew it was unavoidable. Because once certain lines are crossed, silence is no longer an option. The day of the meeting arrived faster than I expected. I spent the morning restless, unable to focus on anything. Every thought circled back to what I would say and, more importantly, what I might hear. When the doorbell finally rang, my heart pounded in my ears. My son stood there with his wife, both of them tense, both avoiding my eyes. The silence between us felt thick as we sat down, like the room itself was holding its breath. Before anyone spoke, I noticed something that immediately unsettled me. My daughter-in-law wasn't just anxious, she looked worried in a deeper way. Her hands kept twisting together, and my son kept glancing at her, as if waiting for a signal. It was clear they had discussed something before coming, something they hadn't told me yet. That realization alone raised the tension in the room. She started speaking first, explaining again about the rent, about deadlines and stress. Her words came out quickly, almost rehearsed. Then she said something that stopped me cold. "We had to move suddenly because the old place didn't work out," she said. "And we assumed you knew." Assumed. That word landed heavily. I asked what she meant by "didn't work out," and once again there was hesitation. My son finally spoke up, his voice low. He said there had been issues with the previous apartment, problems they didn't want to worry me about. He said they thought it would be easier to handle things quietly until they were stable. I listened, but something didn't add up. Too many decisions had been made too quickly, too many details left out. It felt less like protection and more like avoidance. Then came the twist I wasn't prepared for. My daughter-in-law admitted that the landlord wasn't just asking for rent. There was a penalty involved. Late fees. Legal warnings. She said they were already behind before the wedding. Before the wedding. That meant the financial trouble existed even before they decided to marry in secret. My chest tightened as the pieces began to rearrange themselves in my mind. I asked them directly why they thought I would cover all of this. The room went silent. Finally, she said, "Because you said you would help us if things got difficult." Her words echoed in my head. I remembered that conversation clearly now. It hadn't been a promise. It had been a general reassurance, said in a moment of concern, not a lifelong commitment. But somehow, that single sentence had grown into an unspoken contract in their minds. What shocked me more was my son's reaction. He didn't correct her. He didn't clarify. He just sat there, quiet, conflicted, as if he wasn't sure which side he was on. In that moment, I felt a shift in our relationship. Not anger, but a deep sadness. It was the first time I realized he might see me less as a mother and more as a solution to problems he didn't know how to face. The conversation grew heavier as more details surfaced. They had combined finances quickly. Decisions had been rushed. Advice from others had been taken more seriously than mine. I learned that the special people at the wedding included friends who had helped them plan everything in secret. Friends who knew about the apartment. Friends who knew about the money issues. Friends who knew far more about my son's life than I did. That realization cut deeper than anything else. It wasn't just that I was left out. I was replaced. My role had been quietly reassigned without my knowledge. I felt like I was hearing about my own family from the outside, like an outsider being briefed on a situation that should have been shared with me from the start. As the discussion continued, voices stayed calm, but the tension was undeniable. Every sentence carried weight. Every pause felt dangerous. I could sense that we were standing at the edge of something irreversible. One wrong word could turn this into a fight that would leave scars for years. Then my daughter-in-law said something that changed the atmosphere completely. She mentioned that if things didn't improve, they might have to move again.
Quickly.
And this time, they wouldn't know where. The implication hung in the air. Instability.
Risk.
Dependence. I suddenly understood the urgency behind her calls, but understanding didn't erase the feeling of being cornered. I realized the stakes were no longer just emotional. They were practical, immediate, and serious. Whatever decision I made next would affect their marriage, their home, and my relationship with my son. The power of that responsibility weighed heavily on me, and I could see they felt it too. Yet, even with all this on the table, the biggest truth was still unsaid. The reason behind my earlier words. The boundary I thought I had already set. The conversation they seemed to have forgotten, but I hadn't. I could feel it rising, pressing against my chest, demanding to be spoken. As we sat there, surrounded by half-truths and assumptions, I knew the next thing I said would either bring clarity or deepen the divide. And as much as they were waiting for my answer, I was waiting for the right moment to finally tell them what I had meant all along. The room stayed quiet for a long moment, the kind of silence that feels louder than shouting. I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw how tired he was. Not just physically, but emotionally. He looked like someone who had been running from one problem straight into another. Then I looked at his wife, sitting stiffly, her face tight with worry and pride at the same time. That was when I realized this moment couldn't be delayed any longer. I finally spoke, my voice steady but firm. I reminded them of the conversation they kept referring to. I told them exactly what I had said back then, word for word. I had told my son I would help if he asked if there was honesty if we talked openly like family. I had also told him something else, something they seemed to have completely forgotten. I had said I would never support secrets, rush decisions, or being treated like an afterthought. My words hung in the air as their expressions slowly changed. My daughter-in-law frowned, clearly confused. My son's eyes widened slightly, as if a memory had suddenly come rushing back. I continued, explaining that help was never meant to be automatic or assumed. It was meant to be shared responsibility, not silent expectation. I told them that being excluded from the wedding had hurt me deeply, not because of pride, but because it showed a lack of trust, a lack of respect. That was when my son finally spoke up, his voice cracking. He admitted that he hadn't been honest. Not with me, and not fully with his wife either. He confessed that the money problems had started earlier than he'd let on. He said he was embarrassed, afraid of disappointing everyone. So instead of asking for help directly, he avoided the conversation, hoping things would somehow fix themselves. Hearing this, I felt a mix of relief and heartbreak. My daughter-in-law turned toward him, shock written all over her face. It was clear this was the first time she was hearing some of this. Her frustration shifted into something else, hurt. She asked him why he hadn't told her everything before the wedding. His silence was answer enough. In that moment, the conflict between all three of us became painfully clear. We weren't fighting over money. We were dealing with broken communication and misplaced trust. I took a deep breath and told them my decision. I said I would not simply pay the overdue rent and penalties the way they expected. Both of them stiffened, bracing themselves. But then I added that I wouldn't abandon them either. I offered to help them sit down, face the situation properly, and make a clear plan. A plan with boundaries, transparency, and shared responsibility.
Not secrets.
Not pressure. Not assumptions. For a moment, no one spoke. Then my daughter-in-law nodded slowly, tears filling her eyes. She admitted she had felt alone too, trying to hold everything together while believing I already knew and agreed to everything. She apologized, not dramatically, but sincerely, for how she had spoken to me on the phone, for how the wedding had been handled. My son apologized as well, his words heavy with regret. The tension in the room shifted, but it didn't disappear completely. Some wounds don't heal instantly just because the truth comes out. Still, it felt like we had stepped back from the edge. We talked for hours after that, calmly this time, about finances, about expectations, about what kind of family we wanted to be moving forward. It was exhausting but necessary. Just when I thought everything had finally been laid out, one last twist emerged. As we were wrapping up, my daughter-in-law hesitated, then admitted something else. She revealed that the rush to get married wasn't just about convenience or privacy. There had been pressure from outside, advice from friends who believed cutting family out early would make their marriage stronger and simpler. Advice they had followed without questioning. The realization settled heavily over us. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I looked at both of them and said quietly that family isn't a weakness to escape from. It's a support system, but only when built on honesty and respect. They both nodded, and I could see that this lesson had landed deeper than anything else that day. As they prepared to leave, my son turned back and asked if things would ever feel normal again. I told him the truth, that things would be different, but different didn't have to mean broken. It just meant we would have to rebuild, slowly and carefully. After the door closed behind them, I sat alone again in my living room. The tension was gone, but the weight of everything remained. I realized then that the real climax wasn't the argument or the decision about money. It was the moment the truth finally surfaced, forcing all of us to see each other clearly. And just as I thought the chapter had closed, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It was the landlord, asking to confirm details my son had apparently given him, details that didn't match what I had just been told. I stared at the screen, my heart sinking. It seemed that even now, there was still more beneath the surface. And I knew, without a doubt, that this story wasn't quite over yet. I stared at the message from the landlord for a long time before responding. My heart felt heavy, but my mind was clear in a way it hadn't been for weeks. Instead of reacting emotionally, I replied calmly, asking him to clarify what he meant and to send everything in writing. When his response came, it confirmed what I had begun to suspect. The rent issue was more complicated than I'd been told, but it wasn't unfixable. It had just been mishandled, layered with half-truths and avoidance. The next morning, I called my son and asked him to come over alone. He arrived quietly, looking nervous but relieved that I wanted to talk. I showed him the landlord's message and asked him to explain, not with excuses, but with honesty. This time, he didn't avoid my eyes. He admitted he had tried to manage too many things at once, thinking he was protecting everyone when, in reality, he was making things worse. He said fear had driven his decisions, fear of judgment, fear of failure, fear of disappointing both me and his wife. We talked for hours, not just about money or rent, but about how easily silence can turn into distance. He told me he felt caught between wanting independence and needing support, unsure how to ask for help without feeling like he was stepping backward. I listened, not as someone ready to fix everything, but as a mother who wanted her son to grow with honesty, not pressure. By the end of the conversation, something had softened between us. Later that day, all three of us met again, this time with a clearer mindset. We went through the situation step by step. The lease, the rent, the penalties, everything was laid out openly. No assumptions, no rushed decisions. I agreed to help them temporarily, but only under clear conditions. We created a plan together, one that included shared responsibility, realistic budgeting, and open communication moving forward. It wasn't about control, it was about stability. My daughter-in-law surprised me during that conversation. She apologized again, this time more deeply. She admitted she had come into the marriage with strong ideas about independence and boundaries, shaped by advice and stories that painted mothers-in-law as threats rather than family. She confessed she had misjudged my silence as agreement and my patience as obligation. Hearing her say that didn't erase the hurt, but it allowed understanding to take its place. Over the next few weeks, things slowly began to change. Not perfectly, not overnight, but noticeably. Messages became warmer. Calls became more frequent. My son started including me in conversations instead of informing me after decisions were made. My daughter-in-law began asking questions instead of making assumptions. Even small gestures, sharing updates, asking opinions, felt like steps toward healing. The rent issue was resolved through a combination of negotiation and planning. The landlord agreed to a revised payment schedule once things were clearly communicated. The crisis that once felt overwhelming slowly lost its power. What remained was the lesson it had taught all of us. That avoiding conflict doesn't prevent pain, it delays it. That family relationships can't survive on expectations alone. They need honesty, respect, and the courage to speak uncomfortable truths. As time passed, the memory of the secret wedding still lingered, but it no longer defined our relationship. We talked about it openly, acknowledged the hurt, and accepted that mistakes had been made on all sides. I learned that being a supportive parent also means knowing when to step back and when to speak up. They learned that independence doesn't mean cutting people out, it means choosing transparency over silence. One afternoon, months later, my son and daughter-in-law invited me over for dinner. It wasn't a grand gesture, just a simple meal, but it meant more than they realized. As we sat together, laughing over small things, I felt a quiet sense of peace. Not because everything was perfect, but because everything was real. There were no hidden expectations, no unspoken pressures hanging in the air. I realized then that families don't break because of one argument or one mistake. They break when people stop listening, stop explaining, and stop caring enough to face discomfort together. What saved us wasn't money or solutions, it was communication. It was the decision to stop assuming and start asking. Looking back, I understood why that phone call about rent had shaken me so deeply. It wasn't about the request itself. It was about what it represented, being included only when convenient. And I was glad I didn't ignore that feeling. Speaking up had been difficult, but it had also been necessary. The biggest takeaway from this experience was simple but powerful. Love without boundaries leads to resentment. Boundaries without love lead to distance. But when love and boundaries exist together, families can grow stronger, even after painful moments. Today, when I think about that question I asked about the date of my son's wedding, I no longer feel that sharp sting. Instead, I see it as the moment that revealed what needed to be addressed. Sometimes, uncomfortable truths come disguised as ordinary conversations. And sometimes, a single sentence can change the direction of an entire family's story. In the end, this wasn't a story about rent, or a wedding, or even conflict. It was a story about learning how to be a family again, in a new way, with honesty at the center. And that, more than anything, made all the difference.